Hi, I'm back. In this video, I want to clarify something I stated in part 2. Now, this is like the 8th take, and I'm having a hard time defining this as clearly as I can, so please bear with me because I've had enough of doing takes. So you might hear some screw-ups along the way. Anyway, in part 2, I discussed how you should avoid having view code inside of your PHP objects. View code is CSS code and HTML code. So, for instance, if you have a class that connects to a database, you shouldn't have code in there that structures the result sets, for instance. If you're doing, let's say you have a class, for instance, that's retrieving information from a database, you should not, in your PHP class that's connecting to the database and has all the database logic, you should not in that same class have a method that actually builds a table, for instance. You shouldn't have HTML table code in there. It's not a good idea to mix your business logic again being the logic that's used to connect to the database and to validate the data and so on. You shouldn't have that type of code mixed in with code that's used to generate the actual HTML or CSS code that will be used in your view pages. If you want to, for instance, generate very particular HTML that has to be controlled by PHP, that has to be controlled by logic, in that case, what you should be doing is actually creating objects that are dedicated to that and specifically to that. So you'd have, for instance, in this situation, you would have an object that would handle the connecting to the database and retrieving the data from the database. And then you would have another object that would handle building a table with that data. So the way you would pass functions to other functions, so you can do this obviously in the object-oriented world where you can have one object send data to another object. So in this situation, we would have the first object that's connecting to the database and handling all that. It would send the data that it grabs from the database to our other objects, which will build the table. So that was basically what I'm talking about. You wouldn't want to have the table building logic or code inside of your classes that handle the database connections. This may be something a little abstract to grasp at this point, assuming that you're new to object-oriented programming, but it follows a general principle of OOP in that you should separate things from each other. Things being, business logic from view logic and so forth. This separation makes your code much more modular. It makes it a lot easier for many coders to work on things, and also makes it a lot easier for people to update and maintain the code base. There are a couple last points I want to mention about this whole thing. Why, generally speaking, why don't you want to have your display code, your view code inside of your classes? Why don't you want to have HTML or CSS inside of your classes? The number one reason is because web designers, the people that you assume will be building the actual front end of the site in medium and larger projects, they typically, unfortunately for them, don't understand PHP and classes. So for them to be able to go and make a change to some aspect of the look of the page could be a major hassle if they have to go into the classes. They'll have to bug you, the coder, or they'll try to go into the classes and they'll probably screw something up. So that's one major reason why you don't want to have your view code inside of your classes, is that separation of designer and programmer. And when you mix them like that, you're opening up a can of worms you don't want to get into. Trust me, I've been there. And the second reason, if I just check my notes, if you have view code inside of your objects, then what you've done basically is you've decentralized where your code is, how your code is organized. For instance, if you kept all your view code, all your HTML and CSS in the actual view PHP pages, then you know that that's the only place you have to go to update the look and the views of your pages. But if you have half of it in your pages and you have some of it in your PHP classes, then you're going to have to go to two different places to affect the look of a single page or many pages. So you're decentralizing a little bit, so that could make it a little more difficult to organize things. That said, sometimes this makes sense, and there are actual frameworks out there that have done this kind of thing for various advantages. I'm not going to get into this now because it gets much more advanced, and this is after all an introduction to the whole concept. What you should take away from this is that it's a good idea to keep business logic, we discussed what business logic was just a few minutes ago, separate from your view logic, and for the reasons we just talked about. So I hope I didn't even make it less clear. I hope I've cleared up the point I fumbled to make in the second video. Thank you.